Hello again, it's your friend and neighborhood host JT Wheatley back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast, this time with the life of Mike Grell. It has been said that the way to tell what a profession is more important in comic books, writer or artist, is about how one transitions from one to the other profession. While there are numerous examples of artists becoming talented writers, there are not many examples of writers becoming artists. Granted, the profession of a comic book artist, that those do take some storytelling prowess, hence why many do become talented writers. One such example is Mike Grell, a talented penciler who also used his writing abilities to not only revitalize some of the classic comic book characters like Green Arrow, but create his own work like Warlord and John Sable. He is truly an example of the dual writer-artist threat, and his career shows it. Mike Grell was born on September 13, 1947 in Iron Mountain, Michigan, later growing up in his hometown of Florence, Michigan. His mother was a barmaid and later worked in an electronics factory, while his dad was a lumberjack. At the time, Florence, Michigan was considered one of the poorest, most depressed parts of the United States from a survey by the Kennedy administration in 1961. Grell's early life reflected this, as his family didn't own the TV until he was 11, but he did enjoy the radio, books, movies, and of course, comic books. Mike Grell had two older brothers, and all three enjoyed unsupervised play. Once, they pranked him with a pit trap he fell into, and while he was uninjured from it, Grell would not tell the rest of his family until 35 years later at Thanksgiving. Needless to say, their mother was none too pleased when she finally learned this, especially when his brothers joked that he was lucky they didn't have access to bamboo for making spikes. She probably didn't like the fact that they threw knives and arrows at each other as well. Mike Grell would acquire the nickname Tarzan the Terrible as a child for all the ropes and platforms he built in the trees throughout his neighborhood. Of note, the first novel Mike Grell ever read was Tarzan the Terrible, and he would soon become a fan of both the character and its creator, the legendary writer Edgar Rice Burroughs, which would have an influence on his later work, as Tarzan and his other creation, John Carter from Mars, greatly influenced comic books in general. Tarzan the Terrible is especially of interest, as it being not only the 8th book in the series, published in 1921, it introduced the land of Paul Adon, a hidden valley where dinosaurs still exist, a theme that would carry over into one of Grell's most iconic works. This would also have somewhat of a negative but humorous influence on his youth, as Grell thought by reading Tarzan novels he could speak ape, which he tried at the traveling circus to naturally no effect. Growing up, Mike Grell enjoyed numerous radio programs like Jack Benny, The Lone Ranger, and Burns and Allen. He also listened to Lights Out, a horror radio show, by accident. Comic book-wise, Grell loved Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge, acquiring quite a collection. When his mother threw out his comic book collection, Grell tormented her for years later when he acquired a price guide, showing her just how much those comic books would have been worth if she had kept them. Apparently, he had number one issues of Fantastic Four, Amazing Spider-Man, and Incredible Hulk, among others, so yeah, it was quite a collection. Grell also loved the comic strips like Alley Oop, which reminded him of his dad, along with Prince Valiant, Lil Abner, and Pogo. Of course, Grell also enjoyed the Tarzan and Zorro strips, so much so he wanted to be just like them. After graduating from high school, Mike Grell originally majored in commercial art at the University of Wisconsin, understanding it would be the best way to make money. The word commercial definitely attracted him. However, he would drop out after a year to work and save money for a private art school. Being the Vietnam era, Grell would later enlist in the Air Force for 4 years to avoid getting drafted, which is a smart move since in the Air Force, it's the officers who fly the jets and thus go into battle, while the enlisted usually stay behind. Using his skills as an illustrator, Mike Grell got a posting in Saigon. He would continue his art education while serving through the famous Art School Correspondence course, which featured work by Milton Caniff, Al Capp, and Rube Goldberg, with the intention of eventually becoming a comic strip artist. Grell would later state his brother and mother were actually better artists than him, even stating his brother Drake drew the entire 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. While serving in the Air Force, Mike Grell would use his artistic talent to create charts, maps, and graphs. He also provided instructional cartoons for flight departures, escape, and evasion, and many of which remained in the uses at the base, such as Fairfield Air Force Base. Significantly, Grell provided art for briefings at Victoria, working around Christmas of 1970. Of note, due to having the highest security clearance for any illustrator in the U.S. military serving in the Southeast Asia at the time, he was assigned to provide illustrations for a briefing detailing the evacuation from Saigon for the President, Vice President, Secretary of State, and some of the commanders. Only 12 copies were in existence, and is one of the reasons Grell states to hating politics, as while he was overjoyed the U.S. was finally leaving Vietnam, it wouldn't start till 1973 and end till 1975. While serving in Saigon, though, Mike Grell would be introduced to DC Comics and the modern comic books in general, which would inspire his later career. This was done by his friend Ed Savage, who brought a ton of books, from Green Lantern, Green Arrow to Daredevil. Grell especially liked Green Lantern, Green Arrow with Neil Adams and Dick Giorgiano's art, along with Denny O'Neil's stories. Mike Grell's artistic influences were Russ Manning. He loved copying his Tarzan covers, Neil Adams and Dick Giorgiano, for their work on the Green Lantern series. He also was credited with 2 books, The Magic Pen of Joseph Clement and The Pencil by Paul Cale, in influencing his art as well. After being discharged from the Air Force on January either the 4th or the 5th of 1971, Mike Grell went to the Chicago Academy of Fine Art, whose alumni included legendary cartoonists Bill Malden, Hal Foster, and Walt Disney. Granted, Disney was infamously thrown out of the school, while Foster only attended lectures for free while never officially enrolling, something called class auditing, as you can technically attend any lecture at a college to this day, but unless you pay the tuition, you don't get credit for it. It was there Mike Grell earned the nickname Iron Mike, which he based on a comic strip he was trying to peddle to newspapers. Mike Grell would eventually break into the comic strip industry, working on the famous adventure strip Brenda Starr, about a glamorous reporter as an assistant to the strip's creator, Dale Mesnick, in 1972. There he provided repenciling and taking over the weekend strip. Mesnick was about 70 when the Grell started, though she was still a vivacious redhead and considered one of the great beauties in the comic strip world. Grell worked on the strip by adapting to Mesnick's style and even learned to forge her own signature when signing off on the artwork. He would state the only way he could ink her brush style was to ink it under 3 hours to imitate the speed that Mesnick worked at. He would work alongside another of her assistants, John Olson, who provided most of the layouts and lettering. Grell loved recalling stories about Dale Mesnick, who got along famously, and even stated to her that if he had been 20 years older, he would have taken a run at her. Mesnick replied if Grell was 20 years older, he would have been too old for her. She would later brag at the age of 87 she had a boyfriend who was only 75. Mike Grell later made the jump to comic books in 1973 when he went to the New York Comic Convention with the intention of submitting samples to a newspaper editors for comic strip work. Grell would leave them a copy of the comic strip idea Savage Empire about an archaeologist who was transported to ancient Atlantis, and he even had 6 weeks of dailies and 2 weekends banked and ready to go. However, when the editors for the newspapers learned that it was an adventure strip, he got their doors slammed in their faces, as that genre was no longer in vogue at the time. However, at the New York Comic Book Convention, Alan Asherman and Ira Novak recommended him to editor Julie Swartz at DC Comics. While Savage Empire was not picked up by DC either, Grell would eventually meet Joe Orlando, who gave him his first script, a 7-page Aquaman story for Adventure Comics number 435 in October of 1974, called As the Undersea City Sleeps, written by Steve Skeets. Orlando would give Grell tips on each story, such as where he accidentally had Aquaman moon the page with how Grell drew him. Thankfully, Grell wasn't actually a very good swimmer and knew how to draw action of this kind. Mike Grell's second story was Weird War Tales, but it didn't appear for 2 years, as he would later learn that Orlando liked to stockpile stories for later, a common practice that Stan Lee even used during his first years running Marvel. That's not to say he wasn't kept busy, as Grell would also do one-shots for Green Arrow, Batman, and the Phantom Stranger during this time. In 1975, Mike Grell was part of the team of artists working on the Batman family books, which featured Batman as a supporting cast. Grell's next job was on the Legion of Superheroes after artist Dave Cochran left the series. In fact, Grell stated the only reason he got the job was because he was walking into the editor's office right when Cochran had left after quitting. He would famously go on to Marvel to work on the X-Men, where he created Nightcrawler, a character he originally intended for Legion. Grell had previously inked Cochran's pencils with issue number 202, with the first issue of his coming out in 203 of August of 1974, which featured the Invisible Kid and would be the first time Grell worked on the monthly series. With the new assignment, Grell moved to New York City. However, he would soon find working on Legion challenging, as fans didn't like his style of following the legendary Cochran, who set the standard for the series, but he did like working with writer Cary Bates. The following writer, Jim Shooter, was a different story. As his scripts came in at 60 to 90 pages for a 25-page book, Shooter even included thumbnails early on, but stopped after he learned Grell was ignoring them. Mike Grell would later state he preferred working from a full script as an artist, but he felt even Shooter was too much. During his run on Legion, Grell co-created Dawnstar with writer Paul Levitz, though Murray Baltimore gave her tracking ability, who first appeared in Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 226 in April of 1977. He later co-created Tyrock with writer Cary Bates in Superboy number 216 in April of 1976, who he modeled after the football star Fred Williamson. His creation came about when Grell noticed there were very few, if any, black characters in the Legion, thus he created one. However, he got pushback from the editor Boltinoff over this, and the character was recolored into being white, though more than a few readers noticed this and wrote that he still looked like a black guy. Boltinoff assured Grell a black legionary was about to be introduced, so Grell backed off, though he would not be pleased with what finally came about. When Tyrock was introduced, Grell hated the character, especially his name, which he said might as well have been called Tyrone, saying he was obviously a racist in depiction. In protest, Grell made Tyrock as ridiculous as possible, with a costume resembling the one Elvis wore in Las Vegas, along with some chains like Marvel's Luke Cage. In hindsight, Grell is more generous to Tyrock's creation, with more than a few fans calling him the first black comic book character they ever saw, which must count for something. Grell would later say that working on Legion was a nightmare, but though grateful to have it, it was not a job you turned down, especially at the beginning of your career. Grell did end up creating some other characters for the series, such as the villainous Grimbor in Superboy number 221 in 1976, which he co-created with Jim Shooter. Grell later would work with Paul Levitz on All Collector's Treasury Edition, C55 1978, which featured the marriage of Lightning the Lad and Saturn Girl. However, he would soon move on to his own series, Warlord. Warlord was originally a pitch for Atlas Comics, which was founded by former Marvel owner Martin Goodman, who offered $100 a page against DC's $65 to $75 along with ownership rights. The latter was a lie according to Grell, as Atlas ended up owning everything. However, after Grell visited Atlas Comics, its editor, Jeff Rovin, called DC editor Carmine Infantino to brag he had just signed Grell. In response, Infantino made a counteroffer to Grell, stating he couldn't give ownership rights, but he could guarantee a top page rate for the first year. The book Mike Grell came up with was inspired by his Savage Empire strip, which itself was inspired by Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. However, Grell decided to change a great deal about it so he could retain ownership of the original Savage Empire strip later. Thus, the lead character was changed from an archaeologist to an SR-71 Blackbird pilot for the U.S. Air Force, as noted before, which Grell personally served in during Vietnam. And the land was called Scateris, after the mountain in Journey to the Center of the Earth, over being in Atlantis. The series first began in first issue special number 8 on November 1975, later going to series. Mike Grell was originally promised a year run on Warlord, which happened because then DC President Jeanette Kahn loved the book. And a fun bit of irony, Mike Grell finally received his Savage Empire submission he sent to DC years ago, with them actually saying it wasn't what they were looking for at the time. This was most ironic since Warlord, the comic inspired by the Rejected strip, was in print at the time. Mike Grell used other sources for the creation of Warlord. For example, the character of Shakira in Warlord was inspired by the Star Trek episode Gary 7 from Earth, which featured a female character who could change into a cat. To this day, Grell has never revealed if Shakira was a woman that turns into a cat or a cat that turns into a woman. He also enjoyed having Travis not be romantic with Shakira, pointing out that his own real-life experiences of having several platonic female friends. The look of Warlord was originally inspired by Kirk Douglas's film Spartacus and Richard Chamberlain from the Count of Monte Cristo miniseries. That's where he got his silver hair from. The Warlord character would become so popular it would have a Chemco toy line produced based on the comic, which was also inspired by the He-Man Master of the Universe models. Mike Grell would draw 59 issues before moving on to the creator-owned work at Star Slayer and Sable, though he would continue as writer. Grell would also ink his pencils at first, but eventually gave up due to his growing workload. Mark Teixeira took over penciling with issue number 60, followed by Dan Jurgens with issue number 71. It was also from issues number 53 to 71 that Grell's then wife, Sharon Wright, ghostwrote them. The series would eventually end with issue number 153. Mike Grell would return to the character with a 6-issue miniseries in 1992, and another one in 2009 that ran for 16 issues that ended with the death of the title character Travis Morgan, with his son Joshua taking up the Warlord mantle. And with that, we'll conclude with this part of the life of Mike Grell. Join me again next week for the second part, as Mike Grell goes on to even more creator-owned work while also making the jump to Marvel Comics.
Great things are coming on the Nerd Bliss podcast. We're changing up our presentation while keeping the candidness that you enjoy. We'll cover all your favorite shows and movies, with maybe a few surprises along the way. And you, yes you, will have opportunities to be on our show on a regular basis. That's right, we've got the Zoom Pro account, and we're going to use it. So be ready. Find us at nerdblisspodcast.com and esonetwork.com, and on all the socials at NerdBlissPod. Nerd Bliss. Listen up.
And now it is January 30th, 2025, time for the favorite comic of the week. Justice League Unlimited, number 3, by Mark Waid and Dan Mora, which continues the overall storyline that finds this mysterious new enemy taking down the world's environment, with the Justice League uniting across the planet to try to stop it. Meanwhile, some other longer plot lines are addressed, such as Airwave, the new sidekick member of the Justice League, who apparently has some nefarious plans for them. Wade does a great job addressing the main storyline with them, of course, going after this enemy that's trying to burn, the Amazon rainforest. And then, of course, the Justice League uses many of their members to good effect, including one obvious one. And they also address some of the other plot lines, such as them trying to track down the mixed-up powers after the Absolute Power event, and try to get everyone's powers back to where they're supposed to be. It's matched by Dan Mora's gorgeous art, which not only does like some of the best-looking depictions of any DC character, but some breakneck epic action. Just the perfect blend of writing and action and art, and it looks to be a great reboot of this classic series. And with that, hey, look at this. New episode. Yep, this is the first of 10 new episodes I have ready to go. We'll hope you're going for a little while. Hopefully might go 10 longer. I am currently doing research on some more upcoming episodes, but hey, at least got 10 going, so no more archives for a little while. Yeah, you get what you pay for this podcast, and I just do it for fun, and I'm going to keep enjoying doing it. But hey, got at least these 10 episodes to look forward to, or not look forward to, based on how you like it. But till then, go out and enjoy yourself a good comic book, and definitely check out Justice League Unlimited, because so far this has been a great reboot of the Justice League series.